to see you all. We are ready to start class. This week we are going to learn Parshas Emor, a very beautiful Parsha. You know why it's so beautiful? Especially because this Parsha is discussing all the holidays, all the Yamim Tovim that we have, starting with Passover and Shavuos and Sukkos and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. All these portions are being discussed in one parsha. So you can imagine bringing together all the entire holidays into 1 week, celebrating it all by learning about it. Can't be better than that. So welcome aboard. We are going to discuss a very old fashion of charity, which somehow is being discussed both in this week's Parsha and also in last week's Parsha. And we are going to try to understand why is it mentioned twice, and also learning about those special mitzvot, which I call the old-fashioned charity. Basically, if you open the Chumash, if those who want to have opportunity to look it up in the Chumash itself, we are in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, and the Parsha is Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor, on chapter 23, begins with a declaration. Hashem speaks to Moshe, Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'amarta aleim, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Moadei Hashem asher tikreu otam mikra'ei kodesh, eilehem moadai. There are appointed festivals, which that's what the name for a festival in Hebrew is called Moed. Moed means an appointed festival, an appointed time. So this is the appointed festivals which you shall designate as calling of holiness, Mikra'ei Kodesh. This is a time that it's called the convocations of holiness. Eile Emoadai, this is my festivals that begin by first introducing Shabbat and then discussing Pesach. Following Pesach, right after the discussion of the holiday of Passover, the Torah says there is a mitzvah that you are going to perform the day right after Pesach, after the first day Pesach, and this is the mitzvah of the Omer. We have an obligation to take the first bundle of the fresh barley, to harvest it and to offer it as an offering before God. And then you're going to count 7 weeks, which we are doing now every night. We are now in the middle of the 3rd week, counting of the Omer. After going 7 full weeks, 49 days of Kandik, comes the Torah and says, at that point, you are going to have another offering. This time it's going to be of the new wheat, and you are going to call it a holy day, which we are referring to as the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot is the reason it's called Shavuot. Shavuot literally in Hebrew means weeks, and this holiday happens and takes place after counting 7 weeks. What happens after Shavuot? Rosh Hashanah. And after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. And after Yom Kippur, Sukkot. But somehow, on verse 23, before verse 23, means after the holiday of Shavuot, before starting the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the Torah takes a break, and the break is with one and only verse. What does the verse say? The verse says, Ubekutzrechem es ktsir artzechem. When you are going to reap the harvest of your land, lo techale peat sotcho bekutzrecho. You shall not remove completely the corners of your field as you reap it. Veleket ktsircha lo telaket. And you should not gather the gleanings of your harvest. Le'oni velager ta'azov otam, ani Hashem Elokechem. For the poor and the proselyte shall you leave them. I am Hashem, your God. Clearly, something which seemingly has nothing to do with the holidays. This is a mitzvah which we discussed it in Lent last week. And we're going to go back to it in a moment. Those who have a chumash in front of them, we are going to actually go back to that mitzvah. And this is in Parshas Kedoshim, chapter 19, verse 9. What did we learn last week in chapter 19, verse 9? The Torah tells us almost literally the same verse that we just read in Parshas Emor. Parshas Kedoshim is a parsha which has a lot of commandments. Many positive commandments, some negative commandments, and this is usually how the parsha is discussing. All these different commandments comes to verse 9, last week's parsha, last week. Sometimes you think, maybe a few weeks ago we forgot. It just happened a week ago. And what does verse 9 say? Let's read it together. Ubekutzrechem es ktsir artzechem. When you reap the harvest of your land, lo techale peat sotcho liktzor. You shall not finish off the corner of your field. Veleket ktsircho lo yiselakeit. And you shall not gather in the gleaning of your harvest. So far, so good, is exactly what it says in this parsha. It adds 3 more items on verse 10. V'kam mecha lo te'olel. You shall not harvest the young grapes of your vineyard. Uperet kam mecha lo telakeit. And you shall not gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. Le'oni velager ta'azov otam, ani Hashem Elokechem. For the poor and the proselyte shall you leave them. I am Hashem, your God. Before I'm discussing this commandment, but just reading it, clearly there is a part of this verse which was spoken about last week, seemingly just repeat itself this week. It was discussed in Parshat Emor, and now we are repeating it in Parshat Kedoshim in the middle of the discussion of the holidays. Seemingly has nothing to do with the holidays. Just smack center, the Torah mentions that mitzvah again. What is the purpose of it? Specifically, that you see that some of them are mentioned, but when it comes to the mitzvahs relating to grapes, this is not mentioned. So let me first discuss these commandments and then get into an insight regarding them. So as we all know, and let's review it a little bit from the Halacha, from the Mishnah, from the Talmud, there are 4 special gifts which are given to the poor people from your vineyard that you own. One is called peret, one is called olelot, one is called Peya, and the fourth one is called Shikha. Then there are three gifts which apply to the grain, to the wheat. This is Leket, Shikha, and Peya. And then there are two gifts which apply to fruit trees called Shikha and Peya. This is gifts which are especially biblically required to do in the land of Israel, especially when we had the temple. There was a biblical requirement, and today it is only a rabbinic requirement in Israel and outside of Israel. What is the requirement? What does it work? So first of all, this mitzvah applies to things which grows from the earth. It doesn't apply to mushrooms, for example, that grows from the air. It specifically applies to the type of food which is being eaten by people, but those food which are meant just to feed the animals only, that mitzvah again doesn't apply. Number three, this has to have an honor, like if there is a field which is considered honorless, we also don't apply those commandments. And they have to be harvested all at once. But let's say, for example, if you have a fig tree, that you don't harvest all at once, but rather you go each time and you take some of the figs into the house, we also don't have the obligation to apply those commandments. And finally, this is the type of things which people are usually keeping in storage, like wheat, legumes, and so on. Grapes, also people store for a long time, like make wine or raisins. It applies to almonds. It applies to dates, pomegranate. But those fruits and vegetables that people are not keeping for a long time in their storage, but usually you eat them once you harvest them, those items are exempt halachically from those mitzvot. So for example, cucumbers, tomatoes, lettuce, even watermelon, oranges, pears, peaches, they are exempt from that mitzvah called gifts to the poor. To be required to give gifts to the poor from that what grows from your land is the conditions I mentioned earlier, that it has to be something which is kept in storage and something that you keep at home and so on. Now, what is this commandment exactly? Let's start with the first one. Peya. Peya, which means the edge of the field. The Torah commands us that every field owner, or if you have any other orchard for fruit, you have to leave one corner that you are not going to harvest. You are going to let the poor people to come and harvest it for themselves. How much of a corner do you have to leave? So really, biblically, there is no measure. Biblically, it can be a minimal corner. If you have a small field, you have one corner, the southwest corner, the northwest corner, whatever corner you decide to leave, and there is no measure how much of a corner you have to leave. Our sages instituted that you should leave at least 1/60th of the field. So basically, imagine you have a square field. You break it into 60 kubiyot, 60 lots, and equally 60 lots. And this 1/60 in the corner of those 60 pieces is what you have to leave for the poor people. This is the mitzvah what the Torah tells us in our Parsha, Lo techale pe'atzotcha, do not harvest the corner of your field. So biblically, you leave one little piece of crop, you also fulfill the mitzvah. But rabbinically, it is about a 68, which is about 2%. 2% of the field has to be left for the poor. Also, it's interesting to mention that the Talmud teaches us that there are 3 conditions when you need to leave this mitzvah called peah. Peah literally means the edge of the field. Number 1, when there is a lot of poor people, a lot of needy people. Number 2, when your field is blessed with a lot of growth. And number 3 is also to mention that if it's a very small field, and if you're going to break it into 2% of a very tiny field, the poor people are not going to enjoy anything of it. So then you don't have to do it. Peah is usually given at the end of the harvest. Lo techale pe'at tzadcha liktzor, as the Torah tells us in chapter 19, verse 9. When you are harvesting, don't let the edge of the field to become harvest. This belongs to the poor. And the reason that this is the time when you leave it, why don't you just do it anytime you want? So there's a number of reasons. Sometimes if you have a setup time, if there is not going to be, if there's not going to be a setup time, but anyone can come whenever he wants, then you can make up with your family member or a friend and tell them, okay, come in quickly, nobody is here, come take whatever pe'ah is left. That's not fair for the rest of the poor people. So therefore, the Torah says, no, you have to leave it open for everybody to come, and there is going to be a designated time, and this is at the end of the harvest. Also, interestingly, that the Torah was concerned about the time of the poor people. The poor people don't know when is going to be the opportunity for coming and taking advantage of that corner field. They don't know when you decided to harvest. So therefore, our sages tell us at the end of the harvest season, this is the time that every poor person knows that now you can go embark on a field and take and benefit from the peah, from the edge which was left for you. And there is other reasons, and this is mainly the mitzvah. Then comes mitzvah number 2. The Torah tells us, if you forget, v'shachachta oimer basod, right? It says lo yisechale, and then it says, I'm sorry, this is actually in the Deuteronomy. In the Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 19, Chumash Dvorim, it says that when you harvest your field and you forget a bundle in the field, don't go back to take it. Don't go back. You have to leave it for the widows, for the orphans, for the people who are in need. So basically, very simple. A person gathers in his wheat, piles it up, brings the tractor, brings it to the storage, and he forgot one bundle and he doesn't remember where it is. It's a big field. And he can't remember where did he leave it. But he knows somewhere there was a bundle which was not picked up, was not brought into the storage room. Says the Torah, that single bundle that you forgot, don't go back to pick it up. This is something which you were expected to leave for the people in need. They are going to be the ones who will benefit from it. This is called the mitzvah of shikha. Shikha in Hebrew means forgetting, and this is what you were meant to leave what you forgot. Then the tells us, "Veleket tzircha," and when you gather the gleaning of your harvest, don't pick up. What does it mean? A person is, you ever saw harvesting grain? You ever saw a picture of it? They go out to the field and they pick up with their hand a bunch of They hold by the hand a bunch of bundles of grain. In the other end, there is the suckle, the little knife, and they cut it off, and then they bundle it around and get it together. So what happens while you are holding those bundles of grain? One of them falls out. One of them falls out from the bundle. So the Torah says that you don't know what it is, but you know that it fell out and the wind blew it out. Those grain cannot be picked up. Those grains also have to be left for the poor people. And the same applies to the two others, which is the vineyard. That has two other halachot, that by the vineyard, that if there is a few single grapes which was separated from the cluster of grapes during the harvesting of the grapes, one of them or two of them fell, again, you have to leave it for the poor. By the way, the halakha tells us only if it's one or two. If it's three, then you pick it up. If the entire cluster fell off the ground, then again, if a few of them left fell or got kind of detached from the cluster of grapes, you leave it for the poor. And that's how you fulfill the mitzvah of peret. Or if you have unripe clusters of grapes, so these two has to be given for the poor. So what is the clear message? What are we learning over here? You have a field, okay? We are going back to the old times. We are all working the fields. This is not Microsoft stock. This is not other types of income. This is the work that you accomplished with your hands. You worked it with your hands. I went to visit someone today. We're sitting Shiva, so I went to pay a Shiva visit. And we spoke about the children. And the father tells me about his daughter. She says, I don't recognize their job, and then they don't recognize my job. He said, I am from the age of 15, I learned to hold a shovel in my hands. And that's how I make dishes and clean the house and take care of the garden. And my daughter, he says, never held a shovel. She's pressing buttons. So I told them, listen, she's working hard too. She's working with your head and you are working with your hands, equally hard workers. But you know, the way he expressed himself, that we are in a different, we have different lifestyles. But anyway, the point is that when we imagine yourself, you have a field, okay? Everybody can use imagination. You're on a field. And the Torah tells you that you have to open the doors, not once in your lifetime. Every single year, you have to open the fence, the door of your field, in order for the poor and needy to come in, to be able to collect and to pick up their gifts, what was given to them by Torah. And you, the owner, is not even allowed to give preference to one family of who are poor over another family. You can't say, you know, my community is Sephardi, or my community is Chabad, and I am Ashkenaz, and I am Litvish, and I am Chassidish, whatever it is, so let me take care of my community. No, it doesn't work like this. Every single field has to be open to the public equally, and the owner has to allow them in, walk into his field. It's not that you are providing them. They come into your field and they pick up their designated gifts, which are mentioned in these two portions, last week's Parsha on the Torah and this week's Parsha on the Torah. Even more so, Maimonides, the Rambam, when he discusses the laws of the gifts to the poor, he writes even more so. He says that you not only is the owner not allowed to pick up gifts for a fellow friend in need, But even one poor person cannot collect those gifts for another poor person. Each one has to come and enjoy it personally and feel like a balabas, to feel like an honor who walks in freely on his own initiative, with his own bag, to pick up whatever gift he wants. This is clearly the halacha. This is the halacha. And obviously, it's also forbidden to enter the field without permission of the owner of the field. At the same time, he has to give them permission to go in. And each one collects according that he is able to collect. This is the halacha. And there is many other interesting halachas which you can see how very sensitive the Torah is to ensure that every needy person is able to get what he needs to get. I'm going to give you one example. By the way, the Rambam has a section, but the name of the book is called The Laws of Gifts to the Poor, Ilchot Matnot Aniyim, and the Rambam there, those discuss all the details. And it brings the following, which I found very interesting when it comes to these types of laws. The Rambam writes that our Chachamim, our sages, had established that 3 times a day shall the owner of the field open the door for the poor people in order to be able to take those gifts. He has to open the door 3 times a day. Why 3 times? Why do you have to do it 3 times? First of all, why can you do it? Leave the door open all day. Or maybe open it in the morning and close it an hour later. What's this concept of 3 times opening the door? Morning, afternoon, and towards evening. So listen to what the Rambam writes. Very beautiful. The Rambam says as follows. In the morning, we keep it open for poor women who are nursing their children so they can come and collect their gift before their children wake up. Okay? So this is custom made for the needy. We want to make sure that they come before their children wake up. Therefore, there's an opening in the morning. At midday, you're opening the door again for the poor children who woke up late, or for the children who were in school in the morning. So therefore, you open it again. This is their chance. Kids usually like to sleep in, or they went to school in the morning. So you have a noon opening for the poor family's children to come and collect their gift. What happens towards the evening, says the Rambam? There are people who are elderly and they have difficulty seeing and walking too fast. And until they got their strength and their energy and they got dressed and they got themselves together to get to the field, it was already late afternoon. So now you're going to open the door again so they too can come and join and take advantage of their gifts. So basically, setting up times made sure that the owner was providing every single type of needy person an opportunity to come and join from the gift that they need to be given, and also at the same time not able to organize themselves with others and other poor people that he would like for them to have, and then missing the opportunity for the real poor people who did not know about the surprise opening. That's why there is a setup time, a setup day, so everybody was able to come and take advantage of those gifts. This is the halacha. Obviously, this halacha falls in with many other halachot, which is in Torah, the idea of, first of all, caring for the needy, making sure that everyone in the community is supported and they get what they need. If they don't make it on their own, they can rely that they're going to have what to eat, they're going to have what to drink, they're going to have where to sustain themselves. And it's also obviously at the same time showing the person's responsibility towards the poor. Not only they're going to have, I am going to make sure that they're going to have. God wants us to act kindly. This is the story. Now we are going back. Why is it mentioned twice? And why is it mentioned in the middle of the holidays? That question is not my question. This is an original classic question, which is being discussed, as you can imagine, by every single commentator of the Torah. You name it. Ramban, Ibn Ezra, Kli Yakar, Orach Chaim, all the classic mefarshim, all the classic commentators, all want to know why and how are you coming in here in this parsha while we talk about the holidays. What are you making a sudden arrival? Especially, we just studied you last week in the week of Emor. So I'm going to give you two of the classic answers. One is Ramban. Ramban has seemingly a pretty good answer. I have a question on his answer, but he has a pretty good answer. Nachmanides. What does he say? So Ramban says as follows. Ramban says that the Torah wants to tell you, remember, what did we read right after Pesach? The Torah spoke about that when you come into the land and you're reaping its wheat, you shall offer an omer, which is the first measure of barley, shall you offer to the temple as a korban. So then says the Ramban that the Torah wants to tell you that if you have a small field, even if you collect for the great mitzvah called Omer, so don't say for the Omer, I don't have to leave the edge of the field to the poor. No. Even if it's a great mitzvah like the Omer, that mitzvah does not override the prohibition to leave the corner, the edge for the poor. Similarly, someone's going to say, I'm involved in this great mitzvah of the Omer, so if there is something which fell, I should be able to go back and pick it up because it's for the mitzvah of the Omer. Says the Torah, no. I just gave you a commandment, and the commandment is regarding to offer some of the barley, of the wheat from that field, but don't think that because you're involved in that great mitzvah, these prohibitions doesn't apply. You have to do the mitzvah of the Omer, and at the same time, you will follow the general rule that I have in regard to each and every single field, that the edge and the falling grain has to be given to the poor, which is very interesting on its own, because a lot of times a person can think that being involved in a mitzvah kind of gives you like a license to forget about the other things. You say, okay, I'm the mitzvah itself. I'm dealing with the temple service. Do I have to worry for the poor? Do I have to worry for the needy? Comes the Torah and tells you, oh yeah, regardless what you are busy with that field, and regardless what you are designating the field for, you will always, no one has an exemption. Every single person will be required to fulfill this mitzvah. This is what Ramban says. Similarly, there is other commentaries like the Orach Chaim, the Kli Yakar, great rabbis, which also say something similar. They say a little different, but they say something similar. They say that someone might think that that field that you brought the Omer from, so you already did one mitzvah in that field, so maybe you don't have to do all the rest of the mitzvot. You're done. Comes the Torah and tells you, no, that even though you took the beginning of the harvest, beginning of the reaping, and you made from that an offering to God by offering the Omer, you did a mitzvah. Don't think that because you did one mitzvah, you're going to be exempt from all other mitzvahs. That mitzvah, which is called gifts to the poor, is required to every single field, regardless if there was already one mitzvah done with that. You know, a lot of times you meet someone, you ask him to do a good deed, they say, I already did my good deed today. I'm done, check, I did it. Comes the Torah and says, yes, here is a field. That field is a tremendous mitzvah, the mitzvah of the Omer. We just read it. Right after that mitzvah, comes the Torah and says, even though I told you last week, let me tell you again, that same field will still be required with the mitzvah of the Omer. Finally, the Ibn Ezra, a very classic commentator that we like sometimes to share his commentary, one of the Spanish commentators of the Torah, Sephardic commentators of the Torah. He writes the more simple, seemingly more simple explanation. He says, why does the Torah mention again about the mitzvahs relating to reaping and harvesting the field? He says, because we just talked about Shavuot. Shavuot is the holiday which celebrates the harvest of the wheat. So the Torah tells you, while you're harvesting the field, don't forget, you have a number of mitzvot which relate specifically to the harvesting. And this is gifts to the poor, which comes out from those fields. Which, by the way, the Ibn Ezra is very nice, because if you learn the Ibn Ezra, it can also explain you why doesn't the Torah bring the other two gifts, which relates to the grapes, the single grapes, the unripe cluster of grapes, which is mentioned last week, but it's not mentioned here. And some commentators are wondering, where did it go? According to the Ibn Ezra, it's very simple. We are holding in the holiday of Shavuot. That's not the time to harvest grapes. Harvesting the grapes is going to happen when? The holiday of Sukkot. The Torah didn't talk about Sukkot yet. That happens later in September, right? In October. That's not the place to mention it. The fact that he explains that the reason for mentioning it here is that you should know that while you harvest your grain, your wheat, there is a number of commandments which are relating specifically to those mitzvot, is itself the reason why the grapes is not mentioned, because we're not harvesting grapes. No one harvests grapes in June, right? It all happens later by the holiday of Sukkot. But then comes Rashi. And Rashi, which seemingly Rashi is the one who always goes with the classic, simple, more obvious explanation, comes in this week's Parsha, which I would assume Rashi would go with Ibn Ezra, maybe with Ramban. This is like, it fits very up the alley of Rashi, because this is sensible explanation. Suddenly Rashi comes completely out of left field, and he gives us a whole new reason. Listen to what Rashi says. Rashi tells us in this week's Parsha, why on that very same verse, those who have Rashi in front of them can look it up in their Rashi. Again, on chapter 23, verse 22, says Rashi, the great Talmudic sage, which his name was Avdimas ben Rabbi Yossi, or Avdimi ben Rabbi Yossi, said why did the Torah see to put these commandments here among the festivals? And Rashi goes out and it tells us very specific. Which festivals? You have the mentioning of the commandments to give gifts to the poor, says Rashi, with Pesach and Shavuot placed on one side of the commandments, which is the commandments, the holidays, which is mentioned immediately before it, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot on the other side, meaning immediately after it. So he says this question was asked by a Talmudic sage. This is not a commentary question. This is a Talmudic question. The name of the rabbi in the Talmud he asked this question, his name was Averdimas, the son of Yossi. And listen to what he answered. Says Rashi, Lelametcha, to teach you. The Torah wants to teach us a very important lesson. What's the lesson? That whoever gives gleanings, number one, leket, shikha, the forgetting gift, number two, number three, and the corner of the harvest field, whoever gives those three gifts to the poor person properly, it is considered as if he builds the temple and he brought his offerings inside it. This is what Rashi says. What does Rashi tell us? From the top, he brings it from a halachic medrash called Torat Kohanim, quoted by a Talmudic sage. What does the Torah speak about before this and afterwards? We speak about Passover. What does the Torah speak in this week's Parsha about Passover? You know, this week's Parsha, Parshas Emor, it talks about Passover. It doesn't talk about specifically not to eat chametz and so on. It talks about making a holiday and what offerings you should offer during the 7 days of Passover. Similarly, the gifts that you offer on Shavuot. Also, when it comes on Rosh Hashanah, you should offer a sacrifice on that day. Veikraftem ishe l'Hashem. Yom Kippur, what should you do? Again, you should fast. Veikraftem ishe l'Hashem. You should offer a sacrifice to Hashem. Sukkot, Shivat Yamim, 7 days. Takrivu isha l'Hashem. Offer a sacrifice to Hashem. So Rashi says, you learn in this Parsha, and you learn about the holidays. And you know that as much that we are celebrating the holidays, we are not completely celebrating a holiday. Why not? Because there is no temple and there is no korban. And you learn this Parsha and again, a very integral part of the holiday celebration, a very fundamental part of the holiday celebration is to offer korbanot, to bring sacrifices. And yet, there's nothing going on. Last few weeks ago, we had Passover, and there was no korban in honor of Pesach. And last year, Rosh Hashanah, there was no korban. So what are you going to do? What's with the offerings? What's with the temple? Says Rashi, the Torah puts in the center of the holidays, in between Rosh Hashanah and Pesach and Shavuot, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Torah puts in smack center the mitzvah of gifts to the poor. Because this is exactly what the Torah wants to tell you. If there is no offerings, you want to build a temple, you want to be considered that you offer the sacrifice, you make sure that you give from your gifts, from your field, those gifts to the poor people who are in need. That's what Rashi says. This is, I'm not speaking to you as a fundraiser now. I'm telling you what Rashi says in the name of one of the great Talmudic sages. And now you have to wonder, what is the connection from these three gifts? There is other areas in Torah that we give tzedakah, and it talks about charity, and there is even maaser that you give some years to the poor and to the needy, and there is other things that you do great, wonderful good deeds. Why specifically that type of gift associated with building the temple and offering in it its korbanot, as Rashi brings? For that, we have a beautiful insight, which is told to us by no other than the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. The Rebbe, one year, I listened to it a little bit this morning because it's also on tape. It speaks in Yiddish, 1978, at Motzei Shabbat, the end of Shabbat, in the year of 1978. Usually the Rebbe used to farbring and talk on Shabbat. But 1978, the Rebbe had suffered a major heart attack on Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret, and right after that, he began farbringing every Shabbat at Saturday night through an ukap, because he wasn't allowed by the doctors to lead a farbringen downstairs in the synagogue, so he used to lead it from his room, mainly, and then move to shul sometimes. But we have from those years, every Shabbat talks, because the farbringen was not on Shabbat itself. And this morning I listened to it. It's over an hour and a half. The Rebbe talks and he elaborates on this Rashi and those mitzvot in so many details that it's almost impossible for me, obviously, to sit there and review it. It also printed, and it was actually edited by the Rebbe and printed in the book called Lekutei Sichot, which collects his writings. But I'm going to just share that short insight, which I picked out, and why is it that specifically those gifts of charity is considered building the temple and offering a korban. And the Rebbe says very simple, in a sense. He writes as follows. I mean, he said as follows, and it's written as follows too. He says, there is two ways of giving charity. You can give charity for money that you own. Obviously, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, every money you had, you could have buy food for yourself, and you're giving it away to someone in need. Is a tremendous mitzvah. This is one of the pillars, the way the world supports itself. But the money that you have, in sometimes, is very possible that you did not really need to kill yourself and work very hard to earn that money. Let's be honest. Not every dollar we make did we kill ourselves. Sometimes it was a quick, good investment in the market and it went up. Sometimes it was another thing that we bought and we sold and we made a profit. Yes, we are working hard, and I saw my parents working hard, but we all can be very honest to agree that not every single dollar that we earn is because we really gave our whole being to earn it. Sometimes it came to us with less work, with a little mazel, and even the work was not such a heartbreaking hard work. Which type of gift, we will all agree, requires your all investment, your all strength to be put into it in order to succeed? This is farming. Farming, yes, you rely on the rain and the water is pouring by God, but you get up early in the morning and you work very hard with the earth, with your hands, with a shovel, like we mentioned earlier. You sweat, You are being open to the elements of the world. There's no air conditioning in the farm. There is no, farming. Farming is a type of work which takes it all. You being, you guts, you kishkas is being put in to see the final growth of your fruit, your grain, the way it finally developed. And therefore, the Torah says, what kind of gift do I consider that you actually went and you constructed a temple? It doesn't say that you came into the temple. You're constructing the temple. You are building it. What type of tzedakah? It's the tzedakah which the person had invested its full personal strength and energy. He gave it all. He gave it all. And who do you give it? You don't give it to a family friend necessarily. You don't invite your personal community members that you might get a big thank you and recognition and a nice kiddush in your honor. You're not going to get honored for it. You have, like you mentioned before in the many laws, that it has to be equally open to every poor person, a person in need. Here, the whole idea is really representing a perfect gift. A perfect gift means that you gave something completely of yourself and entirely to someone who is in real need. The person who comes to pick up an apple is not using the money to pay the overhead of his organization. Even though organizations need overhead, there is a secretary, there is electricity, but the person who comes to the field to pick up the 2 leftover grapes, if this is the 2 grapes which is going to revive him. But at the same time, you want those 2 grapes because you know how much effort you had put in to make those 2 grapes and to get to that point. Says the Torah, this is the ultimate gift, leket and payah. This is the leaving the little edge on the field, that 1/60th, that you live on the corner and you say, I'm not harvesting it. I have kids and I have a wife and I have a husband and I have a Zayda and a Baba. No. This belongs to someone in need. This is the corner I'm not touching. I'm not touching. And similarly, the gleaning of that which fell and you say, I'm not going to pick it up, even though it's right there in front of your eyes, and you want to pick it up and head it to the bundle. But the Torah says, no, if it fell off, it was meant to fall, and it was meant to be there for somebody in need. Says Rashi, this is called offering a korban. This is called building a temple. This is why it comes in right here in the center of the Torah's discussion about the holidays, the right and the holidays in the left. And here it talks about bringing all kinds of beautiful gifts to the temple on a holiday. You want to know what a holiday gift is? You want to know what building the temple is? Says the Rabbi, Rashi tells us, the temple's gift is the gift that you give away something of you all, which is like farming to somebody who is really in need, because he is the person who comes to collect those leftover grains. This is not for anything else, but simply to ever to eat. I mentioned after Passover that every week we're going to try to bring up something historically what happened this week on the Jewish calendar. So this historical event which took place in this week, I studied in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the one who was building Jerusalem and the temple after the first exile. They were responsible for the second temple. And the way it's being described in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 4 and chapter 7, when he was granted the permission to go build back up Jerusalem, they built the wall, and it says the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul. But then the wall was left with no gates until this week, the 8th of Iyar, when Nehemiah ordered, now it's time to put on the gates for the temple. And when they put on the gates for many years, that was actually a holiday, which was celebrated for the fact that they finally placed the gates of the temple. Then the holiday was canceled for some reasons, but it was originally a holiday, meaning the temple came to its completion. The temple came to its completion. According to Jewish law, when you build a house, you know at which point building the house you are considered the full owner. When you put a door. Once you can have a kitchen and you can have rooms, the moment you put on the doors, then you claim ownership. That means that the house is coming to completion. It's all about the doors. So this week marks the placing of the doors over 2,000 years ago of the second temple by Nehemiah the prophet, the one who led together with Ezra the return of the exile from Babylonia. And now we're talking about building a temple. And how do we build a temple? Rashi tells us in this week's Parsha. We are not farmers. At least I'm not a farmer. I'm sure many of you are not. We don't have fields. And we don't have poor people, Baruch Hashem, to come and pick up an extra grape which fell off. We don't have it too. America is blessed with food. Yes, there are poor people, but that's not the type of poverty, thanks to God. But the one thing is clear, is the moral of this mitzvah. What the Torah tells us, from time to time, to look to give away to somebody else, not only what you worked and earned and it belongs to you, but especially that which is the most precious to you. That which is the most precious. Sometimes you have a day in the week, a meal on Shabbat, you say, this is so precious, I want to be just me and my wife. It's kosher. You're allowed to have a meal just with your wife or just with your husband. But you know what? Once in a while, say, that very precious meal, I'm going to give away to God. I'm going to bring in and invite someone to sit with us. Even though I might not be in the mood and I'm not interested, and I would rather have that precious time spent between me and my family, etc. That's called the gifts to the poor, the types of gifts which this week's Parsha talks about. And I'm sure that in the merit of this type of good deeds, very soon the temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem physically. The doors will be hanged up again, and we're going to celebrate all the holidays of this week's Parsha the way they are meant to be celebrated in its full capacity, with offering its special offerings by the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Let it be speedily in our days. Amen. So this is the class. Now I'm going to come with an announcement. Now comes an announcement. Next week, Wednesday, we have a special celebration, two celebrations. Wednesday night is the famous Lag BaOmer, the night of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when we are celebrating his passing, the way he wanted us, in a tradition to light a fire in his honor. We are going to have a fire lit in honor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the front of the Torah Center of our synagogue, Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Before that, as you all know, there is a cycle of studying Maimonides 3 chapters a day, which completes his study that Wednesday. So this coming Wednesday, 7:30, the time of class, we're going to have a special program. I hope it can be on Zoom too, but we are going to have a physical presence at the Eastside Torah Center when we're going to complete the study of the entire 14 volumes of the Rambam. A number of rabbis are going to speak and share insights into the story of Rambam and the connection to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai and to the holiday of Shavuot. So you are all invited to come join us 7:30 next week at ETC, 7:30, followed by 9 o'clock, the fire lighting in honor of Lag BaOmer. Hope you can all make it and looking forward to see you all. Thank you very much. Laila Tov. And now, if anyone has any questions or comments, please unmute yourself and we'll be happy to hear from you.
Hi, Rabbi. I have a question for you.
Sure, Bernard, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
You're sitting behind something, you look like a lawyer.
Just the my books there. So
I know. You look like a lawyer, I said.
hey, so what happens if you have a field that's not square, it's round? What do you do about that?
Good question. And there is, you divide it into 60 little cubits, to little 60 pieces, minimal, and a 1/60 of it goes to the poor. Corner doesn't necessarily mean a square corner. It means the edge of one of the sides.
Okay, gotcha. And is this still practice in Israel? Any place, where they still give?
If you're on a field, yes, it should be practiced. It's a rabbinic obligation today, sure.
Good. Thank you.
So if you go to Israel and you stay hungry, go look for a field with a corner on harvest and claim your right to enter. I can give you a note if you need, if it's going to get you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Everybody's good? No questions?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay. In that case, we will see you all next week. Laila Tov. Good to see you. Please come join us at the Rambam celebration in Lag BaOmer.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
ורד חוצן, טוב לראות אותך.
תודה רבה, אני מאוד אוהבת לשמוע אותך, אתה מעולה.
Anytime.
תודה רבה, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.